Hi, this is Krish Subramanian from Rishi.Research. We are in the final episode of our Talk Kubernetes show on the sidelines of KubeCon Seattle 2018. I am having Yaron as a guest today with me. I know I've been talking to Yaron for the last 2 years at least. So we have been talking back and forth about Kubernetes, serverless, a lot of things. He's a very interesting character. He is CTO of Iguazio and he writes in many places, including Newsstack and a few other publications. He is a very well known in the community, and I am happy to welcome him to the show.
Thank you.
And can you introduce yourself, talk about your company and the product?
Yes, I'm CTO of a company called Iguazio. I have many years of experience throughout the stack, anywhere from silicon to high-level software. What we're doing at Iguazio is essentially trying to make life simple for building modern applications on top of infrastructure like Kubernetes, but really focus more on the higher level services like functions, databases, AI tooling, etc.
Awesome. So we are meeting on the sidelines of KubeCon. So I'm pretty sure you have made quite a few announcements here, and I would love to hear about those announcements. And also then I would love to pick your mind on what are your expectations for this KubeCon and what do you expect to see in the next 2-3 days?
Okay, thank you. So we made one, every week one announcement I think is enough. We made a big announcement together with Google on introducing a federated solution across cloud and edge, which is really seamless from the perspective of the user and the software developer. So you can develop software in the cloud and automatically federate it to thousands of retail stores or IoT edge locations, where the edge locations are fully unattended. I think there is a definition of edge and on-prem, and people try to mix it. I sort of see it as edge is sort of an unattended. It's like a set-top box that sits in a factory, no IT, no DevOps. On-prem, it's still more like a private cloud. So what we're demonstrating is that you can essentially write software, develop, simulate, build AI models in the cloud in a push of a button, federates to stores. It is oriented towards some joint customers like Trax and others that are doing smart retail. So essentially cameras that sit on shelves of superstores and do real-time inventory level and going into models like Amazon Go. But obviously it's applicable to a much broader aspect as well.
So what are your expectations about this KubeCon? You have been attending many KubeCons now, so what are your expectations here?
Yes, I'm also sort of a member in CNCF. I'm very vocal sometimes about those things. I think KubeCon is still sort of, I've been to AWS to reInvent a couple of weeks ago. I think there's slightly difference here. reInvent is more where developers meet to build products, and they sort of, Amazon bakes the cake every year, says, here's what we baked and go use it. I think KubeCon is still very sort of infrastructure oriented. Is about these are the tools that you can use to build a solution, and it's more, I wrote some blogs about this is like for builders and this for consumers. I think that's the general orientation.
I think there is a clear difference between the underlying infrastructure and the services offered on top of it, like by Amazon or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud.
Yeah.
So what is going to bridge that difference? Like, is it going to be Kubernetes, or is Kubernetes even built for bridging that gap?
Not really. I think if you think, let's assume I'm GitHub and I need to build a SaaS platform, which is really scalable, or a new GitHub or someone. Kubernetes is a great tool because it delivers all the things that I need for distributed computing, cluster management, federation, configuration, etc. So Kubernetes is a great tool for me to build a SaaS offering on top of it. But if you think about traditional IT, they still think of Kubernetes as the next generation OpenStack or the next generation VMware. Is okay, we used to have VMs, now they're smaller and called containers, and this Kubernetes thing is going to manage them. Had an interesting chat with Kelsey Hightower about it when we met in New York in our serverless conference. It was also about, some enterprises still don't really understand the distinction between virtual machines and containers, and trying to make Kubernetes really do all the things that VMware used to do before. That's why I'm thinking that they're taking it to the wrong place. The right idea would be to build a cloud native application which is auto scaling etc. And this is where new solutions like serverless function, for example, allow people to build all the automation around auto-scaling, etc., without the consumer knowing anything about it. So someone writes a function and clicks, and that's really why Amazon built Lambda originally, was a way for you to write something, not thinking about how to do auto-scaling and how to do rolling upgrades. Something else does it for you. You focus on the software. So that's in that sense, I think Kubernetes is still a tool for people that wants to build platforms, and it's not really a platform.
Yeah. So that sort of is a good segue for us to talk about Nuclio platform from Iguazio. So how does Nuclio fit into this landscape? I know it's a serverless platform. Can you lay out the landscape and say where it fits and how it works with the Kubernetes community? That'll be good.
Sure. So Nuclio is just one of our offering. In general, what we're trying to do is really bridge this gap between tools and services. When you go to Amazon, you say, okay, I have DynamoDB, managed database. So I go create a table. I don't think about where's my server, where's my infrastructure, where do I install middleware. Same if you want other services like Athena or SageMaker for AI, etc. You're going through APIs, you're throwing a picture, and you get some response back saying this picture is a dog or a cat. I think that's what customers are really looking for. And the reason people move to the cloud is not necessarily because of cost saving, it's just because of the level of abstraction, the velocity that you can develop modern applications in the cloud is quite different. The problem is that, let's assume you cannot work in the cloud, whether you have on-prem data or whether you're deployed on a ship or in a store, as we discussed before. You still want the same levels of abstraction of focusing on code and data and not focusing on plumbing and YAML files and Docker files and all those things. So this is really where we're coming in. We have serverless functions, which is Nuclio, with a serverless database, that actually multiple databases which are software defined and can emulate time series and NoSQL and SQL. Some of them are actually compatible with the Amazon APIs. We have now a serverless workbench, which is based on some data science framework, so people can just go and write AI workloads. By the way, it can automatically deploy them as functions, as a part of solving the problem of model generation to production. And there are other services they can even load serverless containers, we call it, because they don't know where they're loading it. They're just saying, we happen to have a MongoDB, can we run it? Yes. They deploy it and it self-installs and auto-scales and all that. So that allows the developer to consume the platform. Now, there are a lot of small challenges, like how do you do single sign-on, how do you integrate with LDAP, all those things. So what differentiates us is the sort of more holistic approach. You can go to other guys that do serverless, for example, and you get a runtime. People are not interested in a runtime. They want the experience of a Lambda, logging, monitoring, integration with identity management, integration with storage and file volumes, integration with databases. If you look at what Gartner defines as serverless, is not really a runtime, but it's like a complete platform, where serverless is just a way to write glue logic between other, usually data services. I've read someone writing a post that if you write a serverless function that writes to another serverless function, you probably did a mistake. Obviously we do that from time to time, but it's more to generate the notion that really serverless function is something that listens on, let's say, an API gateway, and then writes to a database, and maybe in sort of more of a bridge between other services. And now if you don't have the other services, what use would you have with serverless functions?
So how does then this fit with the Kubernetes?
So what we claim, obviously Lambda was developed 5 years ago, and there wasn't Kubernetes, so Amazon provided everything themselves. But putting a serverless frameworks and databases and other things on top of Kubernetes is an ideal situation. Two reasons. One, it's the best abstraction layer across all clouds, because now that everyone has Kubernetes, then Kubernetes is the new operating system. I can write a service that will run in Amazon, will run in Google, will run on-prem, even on an edge device, and provide me consistent APIs which are abstract enough to work with. I don't want to work against bare metal CPUs. The second is that it alleviates a lot of the hard work of dealing with distributed systems, configuration management, scaling, rolling upgrades, failures, watchdogs, security, and so on, multi-tenancy. And we overall really like the architecture of Kubernetes, so this solves the main two things. If I define a serverless function that essentially programs the Kubernetes API underneath, now unlike Lambda, I have GPU support, CPU support, volume support, a zillion of features that I didn't need to develop. I can just, but you still need the abstraction on top of Kubernetes because Kubernetes is not for developers. YAML files and all that. It's not something that is a consumer that writes software programs I want to utilize.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So doesn't Knative sort of try to fill that gap a little bit? Like, I understand Kubernetes as it is not coming.
Yeah, so that goes back to the tool versus solution. Okay, we were a little frustrated that Knative out of 5 sessions on serverless got 4 out of them. Because Knative was just like launched a couple of months ago, and suddenly, and that really emphasized that who's coming to that show is that the guys are coming to the show are guys are interested in the new cool technology that was baked in Google warehouses, or they're interested in consuming something that already works. So Knative is a tool to build serverless functions. Mm-hmm. Does a user benefit from Knative? No. Someone that
probably not directly, but it makes it easy to sort of plug in different serverless frameworks and let users write functions to it.
But I'm saying that if I'm a user, what I want to know about, because I'm talking to users, we have Nuclio installed in major enterprises, in banks, in some major telcos, and what they care about, they don't care about Knative. They take about, are you taking care about isolation, security? What about adding trigger? What about making workflow easier to work with, etc.? So a real user that writes application doesn't care about any of that. It's an attempt to go and normalize the lower layer. Now, there are certain things in Knative that we may adopt that are good ideas. There are certain things that Nuclio have implemented way more advanced because it's like 2-3 years more mature than Knative, that Knative still needs to work quite a bit to get to the same level of functionality. There are also certain opinions that Knative only supports HTTP as a trigger. Because of the nature of what we're doing, a lot of real-time analytics, we support streaming, we support message queuing, we support many other things. So there is a very narrow thinking on the design, which is where some of the industry is at. And we're sort of 2 years ahead of the industry. So for us going and adopting Knative as is in its entirety is essentially harming the user and not benefiting the user. Now, can we leverage some of the functionality? Obviously, once it gets matures a bit more. But I don't really understand this sort of sentence of, okay, now let's go and define that's the level playing field that we all need to run functions on. Mm-hmm. There's Kubernetes API. Why would I need to use Knative as another sort of middle API to normalize everyone on top?
And this sort of brings us to the use cases you are seeing with Nuclio. We have already spoken about some of the use cases, but for our viewers, if you can talk about the use cases you are seeing.
Yeah, so we're, again, Nuclio is part of our platform, so as a whole, what we're trying to deliver in a platform is a different type of data analysis application platform. So if you think about traditional big data solutions, Hadoop, etc., it was about throwing data into a lake, mostly unstructured, and then doing sort of what's called schema on read. It's like when I'm reading the data, all those junk log files, I'm trying to make sense out of it. And then it takes a lot of time to analyze, and people usually have a lot of headache doing so. What people understand is that that's not really interesting. What they want to do is put data and AI into action, into business applications. So let's assume I'm logging into a website. I want to get real-time recommendation based on my location, my previous historical records. So that requires something which is more highly concurrent, low response time. Same with like cybersecurity. It reminds me of a call I got from my credit card, when I left the airport, that they blocked my Uber, and says go reinitialize your application. I'm reinitializing the application, getting the same error. Couldn't you figure it out that it's Uber and it's me and I just landed and I have the app installed on my phone so you could just triangulate my GPS location. This is where application needs to go, is the ability to take different data inputs, contextualize them, and make meaningful decisions in a short latency. And that's where we're taking Nuclio, is we're working, for example, with telco on real-time cybersecurity, real-time network congestion alleviations. We're working on predictive maintenance use cases, on also marketing recommendations, all sorts of things that requires those glue logic, which the functions provides, a strong database and strong analytic capabilities and AI.
So, on that note, isn't Kubernetes community trying to collapse Hadoop into Kubernetes? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're sort of leading the flagship on that, because one of the challenges, Hadoop has its own clustering technology, something called Yaron, if people are familiar with that. So you need to develop your own cluster. And then you have another cluster designed for like a more interactive workload front end called Kubernetes. And there are things in between, like streaming technologies. And now even in the data science and AI world, there are two camps. There are the guys that learn Python and Jupyter and those kind of things, usually the data scientist camp. And there's sort of the older camp of Java, Scala, Hadoop, MapReduce, Hive. And now they can't even live on the same cluster. Each one has his own cluster, because the cool Python pandas guys, they like Kubernetes and TensorFlow, and the other guys are running on Yarn. So the right solution is collapse that. We don't really need an extra scheduler. We want to put all the resources on the same sort of resource plane. And so the right thing to do is port applications that are widely used in the big data space, like Spark and Presto and others, make sure they work on Kubernetes. That's something we've done on our platform. You run Spark, Presto seamlessly on Kubernetes, much better, auto-scaling. All the vision of sort of cloud native is now sort of attaching to big data, along with all the rest of the gang, the Python things, the interactive, because I may need an interactive function to run inferencing. I may need Python tools and data science to generate a model. I may still want to use Spark because it's very good for stream processing. So I would like all those things to coexist on a single cluster.
Before we wind up, one last thought on between now and the next KubeCon in North America, where do you expect the community to go?
First, I see the community grew quite a bit. I think it's almost double or more than double the number of people that were the last time. I'm trying to push for the community to think more about end users and less about infrastructure. I think, I really have fun coming to KubeCon because I have many friends, because all of us infrastructure or middleware or platform builders are reunion and going to beers, and I may find some customers here. But I think KubeCon really needs to start and think how we attract users, end users, and that will only happen if we start moving the messages a little up, not talk about Knative in a serverless track, but talk about how people use serverless functions. We ran the serverless New York event a couple of months ago. We only had end user talks about how they use it for their business application. We didn't have a single, we got submissions that we sort of rejected, about people that build their infrastructure and want to say why it's great. But we only accepted sessions which talk about, this is the user, that's the application problem I address, and that's how I use service for it. And all the crowd was users, and I think that's what we also need in KubeCon to start adopt this mindset. We don't just want to appeal to infrastructure developers or infrastructure and DevOps, but also to the user community that build applications on top of cloud native.